Welcome back to Beginner Basics. We are going to learn how to do single crochet today. Now this is a very good simple stitch to learn for beginners and advanced beginners because you will even use it when you become very experienced. We're going to begin today with a single crochet worked into a foundation chain. If you need a refresher on how to do a chain stitch, make sure you go check out my Beginner Basics on chains. So let's go over here and check it all out. To begin with, I'm going to have my crochet hook. I have my beginner chain already created. I have chained 11 stitches, and I'm going to have 2 stitch markers. These are removable stitch markers, and we're going to use them, and I'm going to show you and explain to you why we are. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick my hook right back here into my loop that I have waiting, and I'm going to turn my work. So I have been creating my chain. It's all nice and pretty here. I'm going to turn my work around so that I have this chain stitch. Essentially, it's going to be worked like this. Can you see how this goes? Because what we're going to do is we're going to begin to work these single crochets down the chain here. Now to begin the single crochet, typically you'll chain, say you'll chain 11 and it'll say work a single crochet in the second chain from hook. Remember, you never count the chain that's on your hook. So we're going to skip this chain and go into this chain here. Now when you work into the chain stitch, you have to make a decision whether you want to work just into the back loop of the V right there, or work into the back loop of the V and the butt of the stitch. Can you see that? Either one will get you the same results as far as you're going to be able to complete a stitch. So it's all up to you as far as what the aesthetic of your foundation chain is going to be at the bottom of your piece. For today's instructions, we're going to just go into the back loop of that V. Now you'll see I have my yarn tension, just however you can tension your yarn is perfect. I'm going to take my hook. I'm going to go from left to right underneath the working yarn, and I'm going to grab my yarn. Then I'm going to have this yarn come through this loop that we just went through. So I'm going to pull it right on through and up. When I bring the yarn up, you'll see I have my hook and I make it parallel to my chain stitch. What that does is it creates a very uniform stitch. If you were to create the single crochet down here still kind of crimped up with this yarn, it doesn't make a very uniform stitch. So once you pull up the loop, make sure you make your hook parallel. It just makes a much more clean stitch. I have 2 loops on my hook now. I'm going to take my hook and I'm going to once again go from left to right, going underneath my yarn. Grab a length of yarn from the working yarn and pull it through both loops on the hook. Now I'm going to do that one more time. So now I've created the first one. I'm going to go over to the next chain on my foundation chain. I'm going to go into the back loop, yarn over my hook, and pull up a loop. I have 2 loops on my hook. Now I'm going to yarn over my hook, and I'm going to, if you'll notice, if you watch the chain video, these loops are kind of like teardrops. So when I yarn over my hook and I have my hook going pointed towards the bottom of that loop, it's easy to pull it right on through both of those stitches. I'm creating a nice, pretty V stitch on the top here, and I'm getting the nice post of the stitches right here. Now I'm going to pause right here because we're going to grab one of these stitch markers, and I'm going to put it in the first V stitch, which this was the first single crochet we created. I'm going to stick it right in the top there, okay? The reason I'm doing that is that's going to be my clue. When I come back to this side of the work, that's going to be my last stitch. All too often, we as beginners and advanced beginners and experienced knitter or crocheters accidentally work into the wrong space to finish our row. So we get fabric that becomes kind of wavy and unsightly on the edges. This is going to get you a very clean and crisp edge. If you do this every time, I guarantee you're going to just have beautiful blankets or pot holders or whatever it is you tend to gravitate towards making. So I'm going to continue on down the chain stitch here, and I'm doing the same thing in each one. I'm going into the chain, yarning over, pulling up a loop, and my hook is parallel. I yarn over and I pull through 2. Now as I'm moving along, you'll kind of see that I'm using my right hand, my pinky finger, and my ring finger, and I start grabbing my the chain and the single crochets I've created to give me a stable fabric or a stable piece of work to go into. Otherwise it kind of flops around a little bit and I don't really like that. So as I'm creating each one, I move along and I just hold it steady over here, hold it steady over here, and it makes it so much easier for me to work into. Now I'm going to go all the way to the end. And since I had chained 10 or 11 stitches and we worked into the second chain from hook, that means we don't count the last one, we are going to end up with 10 single crochets. So if I were to stop here, I would count. So I'm going to start down here at the very first single crochet I completed. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now to move up to the next level of the single crochet, you have to think of it as stepping up to the next level. You have to create the height on the side for the stitches you're going to create. And so for a single crochet, to create that height, you're going to always chain one at the very end. So that chain one, we are not going to count that as a stitch. It's just going to be a way for us to move on to the height of the next level. You can also think of it as when we chained 11, and we skipped the first chain and worked into the second to begin our single crochets, which left that kind of random single or that random chain stitch out there. This is our random chain stitch out here. It's not going to be a stitch, okay? Once again, I'm going to turn my work. Knowing that that's a chain stitch I'm not going to work into, I'm going to work into the first single crochet of the next row. So the first single crochet, it's right here. Here's the 2 V's. Again, you have to make a decision whether you want to go into the back loop of the V, the front loop of the V, or both loops. The way patterns are written, they are written to have you go into both loops unless they want you to go into just the front loop or back loop only. So if it is not stated to go into front loop or back loop only, you will go into both loops. Now, once again, to do that, you come over here. You'll see there's kind of like this little, see that hole? It's kind of the general little hole right there. If I stick my hook right into that hole, you'll see my hook is resting right underneath these 2 V stitches, and that's what I want. So I'm in there, I yarn over my hook just like before, I pull up a loop, and I yarn over my hook, and I pull through 2. And I carry on that way completely down the row. I'm going to extend my yarn here a little bit. It's gathering up on me. But wait a minute, what did I forget? Can you remember? I didn't actually forget. I wanted to put this out for you guys. I need to put my second stitch marker down here because when I get down here, I'm going to have a stitch marker telling me where I want to be. But when I come back to this end, I want to know where I want to be, right? So I'm going to use my stitch marker, and I'm using a different color on purpose because I want you to remember which end you're going to be on. And I'm going to stick it through the very first single crochet I completed, right there. Now, there's no excuse for me not to know where my last stitch is of that row. So as I'm coming down here, I'm going to move along a little bit quicker. I'm going into both loops just like before, right on in and coming out, one on in and coming out. If you had not marked that stitch, you might be fooled and say, oh, that's my last stitch. It looks like it, but it's not, and we know that because we have our stitch marker right here. So leaving my stitch marker in there or taking it out, whichever way, I'm going into that stitch just like I had before, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, drawing through 2. Does that make sense? So, Marley, do I leave that stitch marker there the whole way and just keep getting stitch markers? No, you don't have to do that. So I chained 1, I turn, I go into the first stitch just like I did before. I'm going to complete my single crochet. I'm going to take the stitch marker from down there and I'm just going to move it up because now that's the end of my row. Make sense? I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to pull in one that I've already kind of gathered and done here for you. If I set this down, it naturally curls. Don't be afraid if you're like, what's going on? It's curling. Yarn, and when you're working with single crochets or any sort of crochet, it naturally wants to curl on you until you wash and block that, and we'll talk about that in future videos. But you can see here, I have the last stitch of my row marked right there, so I know that when I come to the end, that's going to be the end. The first stitch is already marked. And here's another way for you to use a stitch marker. If you need to put your work down and stick it in your project bag because you need to walk away, put your stitch marker in your active loop. That way, when the yarn gets pulled, it's not going to get pulled out. It's going to stay right where it is. Once you complete, your project, you keep working single crochets back and forth. Whichever end you want to end on, you'd cut your yarn, pull it through, and you have a finished project. So now you know how to do a foundation chain, slip stitch, and single crochet. Come Come back here on the other videos on my channel, Marley Bird, and learn how to do double crochets and treble crochets.